He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a morning dress, in whose eyes there were tears, which sparkled in the light that shone out of the ghost of Christmas past. "It matters little," she said softly. "To you, very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in time to come as I would have tried to do, I have no cause to grieve." "What idol has displaced you?" he rejoined. "A golden one. This is the even-handed dealing of the world," he said. "There is nothing on which it is so hard as poverty, and there is nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth." "You fear the world too much," she answered gently. "All your other hopes have merged into the hope of being beyond the chance of its sordid reproach. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one, until the master passion gain engrosses you. Have I not?" "What then?" he retorted. "Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I am not changed toward you." She shook her head. "Am I? Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so, until in good season we could improve our worldly fortune, our patient industry. You are changed. When it was made, you were another man." "I was a boy," he said impatiently. "Your own feelings tell you that you were not what you are," she returned. "I am. That which promised happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and how nearly I have thought of this. I will not say. It is enough that I have thought of it and can release you. Haven't ever sought release. In words? No, never. In what then? In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end, in everything that made my love any worth or value in your sight. If this had never happened between us," said the girl, looking mildly, but with steadiness upon him, "tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now? Ah, no." He seemed to yield to the justice of his supposition, in spite of himself, but he said with a struggle, "You think not. I would gladly think otherwise." "If I could," she answered. "Heaven knows, when I have learned a truth like this, I know how strong and irresistible it must be. But if you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can I even believe that you would choose to dowerless girl, who you in your very confidence with her weigh everything by gain, or choosing her if for a moment you were false enough to your one guiding principle to do so? Do not I know now what your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do, and I release you, with a full heart, for the love of him you once were." He was about to speak, but with her head turned from him, she resumed, "You may. The memory of what is past half makes me hope you will have pain in this, a very, very brief time, and you will dismiss the recollection of it gladly, as an unprofitable dream, from which it happened well that you are awake. May you be happy in the life you have chosen." She left him, and they parted. "Spirit," said Scrooge, "show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me?" "One shadow more!" exclaimed the ghost. "No more!" cried Scrooge. "No more! I don't wish to see it. Show me no more." But the relentless ghost pinioned him in both his arms and forced him to observe what happened next. They were in another scene and place, a room not very large or handsome, but full of comfort. Near to the winter fire sat a beautiful young girl, so like that lass that Scrooge believed it was the same, until he saw her, now a comely matron, sitting opposite her daughter. The noise in this room was perfectly tumultuous, for there were more children there than Scrooge in his agitated state of mind could count, and unlike the celebrated herd in the poem, they were not 40 children conducting themselves like one, but every child was conducting itself like 40. The consequences were uproarious, beyond belief, but no one seemed to care. On the contrary, the mother and daughter laughed heartily and enjoyed it very much. And the latter, soon beginning to mingle in the sports, got pillaged by the young brigands most ruthlessly. What would I not have given to be one of them, though I never could have been so rude. No, no, I wouldn't for the wealth of all the world have crushed that braided hair and torn it down, and for the precious little shoe, I wouldn't have plucked it off. God bless my soul, to save my life, as to measuring her waist in sport as they did, bold young broad. I couldn't have done it. I should have expected my arm to have grown round it for a punishment, and never come straight again. And yet I should have dearly liked it. I own to have touched her lips and to have questioned her, that she might have opened them, to have looked upon the lashes of her downcast eyes, and never raised a blush, to have let loose waves of her hair, an inch in which would be a keepsake beyond price in short. I should have liked. I do confess I have had the slightest license of a child, and yet to have been man enough to know its value. But now a knocking on the door was heard, and such rush immediately ensured that she was laughing face and plunder dress was borne towards the center of a flushed and boisterous group, just in time to greet the father, who came home attended by a man laden, with Christmas toys and presents. Then the shouting and the struggling and the onslaught that was made on the defenseless porter. The scaling him with chairs for ladders to dive into his pockets, despoil him of brown paper parcels onto tight by his cravat, hug him round his neck, pommel his back, and kick his legs in irrepressible affection. The shouts of wonder and delight in which the development of every package was received. The terrible announcement that the baby had been taken in the act of putting a doll's frying pan in his mouth, and was more than suspected of having swallowed an infectious turkey glued on a wooden platter. The immense relief of all the finding this is a false alarm. The joy and gratitude and ecstasy. They are all indescribable alike. It is enough that by degrees of children and their emotions got out of the parlor, and by one stair at a time up to the top of the house, where they went to bed, and so subsided. And now Scrooge looked on more attentively than ever, when the master of the house, having his daughter leaning fondly on him, sat down with her and her mother at his own fireside. And when he thought that such another creature, quite as graceful, as full of promise, might have called him father, and been a springtime in the haggard winter of his life, his sight grew very dim indeed. "Belle," said the husband, turning to his wife with a smile, "I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon. Who was it? Guess. How can I?" "Tut, don't I know?" she added in the same breath, laughing as he laughed. "Mr. Scrooge." Mr. Scrooge it was. I passed his office window, and as it was not shut up, he had a candle inside. I could scarcely help seeing him. His partner lies upon the point of death, I hear, and there he sat, alone. Quite alone in the world, I do believe. "Spirit," said Scrooge, in a broken voice, "remove me from this place. I told you, these were shadows of things that have been," said the ghost, "that they are what they are. Do not blame me." "Remove me," Scrooge exclaimed. "I cannot bear it." He turned upon the ghost, and seeing that it looked upon him with a face in which, in some strange way, there were fragments of all the faces it had shown him, wrestled with it. "Leave me. Take me back. Haunt me no longer." In the struggle, if that can be called a struggle, in which the ghost, with no visible resistance on its own part, was undisturbed by any effort of its adversary, Scrooge observed that its light was burning, high and bright, and dimly connecting that with its influence over him. He seized the extinguisher cap, and by a sudden action pressed it down upon its head. The spirit dropped beneath it, so that the extinguisher covered its whole form. But though Scrooge pressed it down with all his force, he could not hide the light, which streamed from under it, in an unbroken flood upon the ground. He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further of being in his own bedroom. He gave the cap a parting squeeze in which the hand relaxed, and had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep.